Welcome to the Counseling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counseling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 75 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes, and with me, as always, my fellow traveller in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you doing, Ken?
I am well indeed. Yourself, Rory? Feeling good as spring approaches?
Oh, yes, spring has sprung, certainly here at Counselling Towers, yeah.
It is. In the UK, it is that time that the flowers are out, the bees are buzzing, the birds are singing, and it's just a lighter time, I guess, coming out of winter, and a lighter episode maybe today, or not, depending on how you view the topics. Episode 75, we're going to be kicking off by looking at psychodynamic theory. That's thick and heavy, so I'll be relying on you a lot there, Rory, and I'll be nodding and going, lots for me to learn there. We're going to then be looking at, in practice matters, transference. Now, we've never covered that before. Yes, we have, but we're going to be looking at transference in the therapy room. We cover it again because it is so important. There's so much to learn on that. And then we're going to be closing episode 75, looking at Maslow, hierarchy of needs, and how that theory underpins who we are as counsellors, as therapists, and we're going to link it to the humanistic therapy and looking a little bit of how that influenced Carl Rogers. Exciting episode. I'm handing straight over to you, Rory. Psychodynamic theory.
I think we'll start off with Uncle Freud. Sigmund Freud, of course, was the father, really, of modern talking therapies, in that he went away from kind of giving medication out. He never gave medication out, but he went away from that kind of medical model and started to talk to people and try and understand what made them tick, effectively. And it's sometimes referred to as drive theory. It shouldn't be underestimated that Freud started his professional life researching the reproductive organs of eels. Can you believe that? That's what he did.
Interesting.
And he went. It is, yeah. And he went on to really be the father of modern talking therapies. And it's really interesting because his theory is based on what's called drive theory, and it's the kind of unconscious effect of what goes on in our subconscious and how it affects our day-to-day life. And he developed what's really called a tripartite view of personality, in that our personalities were in three separate spaces, and he called that the id, the ego, and the superego. And the id is the very childish part of us that might want, I want cake. I think we've talked about the chocolate cake. I want cake. And the superego is like the kind of societal part of us who says you can't eat cake, you're going to put weight on, you're going to become ill. And the ego is the poor bit in the middle that kind of negotiates between the kind of very critical side and the very free side and tries to find a way through. Id, ego, and superego. But really important, I think, to get across that it's a tripartite view of personality, unlike humanistic personality models, such as Carl Rogers' organismic self, which is a complete whole. Rogers split it. Freud split it into three. And he also talks about things such as the part of our drives were our sexual drives. So he gave us a personality. He gave us an idea that part of our personality was formed because of our sexual drive. And he also gave us some not so good phrases. One is hysteria. We've all heard of hysteria. And, he invented that for women, effectively. And a lot of the feminist view of that would be that he wasn't very respectful of women, in that he didn't see them as humans on the same plane as men. And he thought that some behavior was purely down to someone being female, which, is wrong. But really interested, and I think if we take away the kind of not so good bits of him, what we're left with is an idea that our childhoods affects our adulthoods. What happens in childhood affects our adult side, which is where the therapists that came after him came in, and I'm thinking about TA Eric Berne. Eric Berne developed transactional analysis from a lot of Freud's theories, and he, of course, in that there is a tripartite view of personality: parent, adult, and child. You could say
was nicked a bit.
Ego and superego. Yes, I think he borrowed it. I think it was a homage, Ken.
Homage, is that a better word than nicked? It probably is, Rory. Yes. And just speaking of the ego, the superego, we have a phenomenal article that Rory wrote. It's on counsellingtutor.com. We'll put a link into today's notes, and you can go and have a look at that. It gives you just a little bit more information about Freud himself, a little bit more about those that try. Tell me again, Rory. The try.
Tripartite is the correct word.
It's the correct word, tripartite. I like it. And of course, we're talking now psychodynamic. We're talking a therapy where the therapist is the expert in the relationship, is the telling the client or the patient, as they might well be known, what they should be doing. And it's about empowering the client to be able to, I guess, tap into those early memories that is not maybe fully in the conscious mind, but working with techniques. It's interesting.
Yeah, and they were called. You were right. They were referred to as patients, but they were called Anella Sands. Can you believe that? Anella Sands.
Anella Sands.
So the power imbalance was huge, and the big. I've just given a lecture in the counselling study resource on a part of Roger's theory called the 6 necessary and sufficient conditions for therapeutic change, and really it was a massive. Those 6 conditions are a total difference to Freud's idea of standing back, observing, being distant from the client, to really Roger's ideas of getting involved and becoming and building the relationship up. Really, really, really quite different. And I'm sure that modern psychoanalysis, we have to say that psychoanalysis is still a practice therapy.
Yes.
And I'm sure that most modern psychoanalysts who practice Freudian ideas would have perhaps a different take on the way that Freud worked. I think they'd work in a more modern and collegial way than perhaps Freud, or in fact his co-conspirator in all things subconscious, Jung.
Yes.
Because they kind of collaborated for a bit until they fell out. So yeah, still a therapy, and still one I was just saying to Ken before we broadcast, that one that's again finding interest. It's becoming revisited now. So they all seem to go around.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a debate that comes up from time to time. We definitely see it in our Facebook group, and that is, what is the difference between counselling and a counsellor and a psychotherapist? And I guess a psychotherapist is more likely to, it's in the root of the word, isn't it? In the psycho, and looking at psychodynamic, you would call yourself a psychotherapist there.
Yeah, and I think we don't need to get too confused. I think psychoanalytic and psychodynamic. I think we need to be thoughtful of that. Psychodynamic is the kind of mode. Psychoanalytical is the mechanism that it's delivered. So people could be psychoanalysts and be sort of be TA psychoanalysts or versions of that. Psychodynamic, really, that term is about therapists working with the subconscious and subconscious drives and bringing them into consciousness. So that sometimes gets confused. So I hope I've cleared that up.
Thank you very much. It's definitely straightened me out on that one, Rory. I appreciate it, because as I said, coming into this, it's not an area I know a huge amount about. But it is very interesting, and I do look at it as being the building blocks, I guess, of what we practice today. Somebody needed to come up with these theories for us to be led down this road. And I guess one other thing that might be said is it tends to be a longer term therapy as well, as opposed to a short term. It's unlikely that you would go for psychoanalytical therapy for 3 to 6 sessions. It's usually you're going to be quite committed to be going for some time.
Yeah, I think as a rule, if you want to sort your entire life out, you see a psychotherapist. If you want to sort just a couple of issues out, you see a counsellor, and that is just down to the fact of the length of time, and also that psychoanalytical therapy really addresses all of you, your history, everything, where counselling really focuses on just the issues that you bring.
Thank you very much, Rory. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed hearing about that. I always love to learn something new, and I find myself going away from the podcast and thinking about it and processing it and wanting to learn a little bit more. And if you're the same and you're listening to this, you want to learn a little bit more, head on over to the show notes page, because that's where we put the links, and you'll find that counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab and go to episode 75. All the show notes are there. And of course, this conversation was started by a comment on our Facebook group. If you're not a member of the Facebook group, please come and join us. It's a group of counsellors and psychotherapists in training. We've got some tutors in there, some counsellors and therapists in practice as well. And to find that, just go to Facebook and type in Counselling Tutor, knock on the door, because it's a closed group, and we will welcome you in warmly. And we spoke a little about this being very much subconscious process, and that leads us neatly on to what we're looking at in Practice Matters today, which is transference, which is generally, well, it is by its very nature, a subconscious process, Rory.
It is, and I think I'm going to be bold here. I think it's one that's under taught in humanistic, person-centered courses, because, what Freud would have done was would try to get out of the relationship and just be a passive observer, whereas person-centered therapists and modern-day therapists build on the relationship. But part of that is that the transference is where maybe our client sees us as someone from their past, an element of who we are from their past, and reacts as they would to that person in their past. And we have to be alert for that as therapists, no matter what modality that we're practicing. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about how I handle that in the therapy room if it comes up.
Without any further ado, it is Practice Matters.
Practice Matters.
Through the years, I've lost count of the times that I've come across the phenomena of transference. Many years ago, when I used to teach, I came across it quite regularly. And in one instance, a student stayed behind after class and said to me, "Do I irritate you?" And I said, "No, you don't irritate me, but I wonder why you feel that." And she said, "Well, you remind me of my father." And I said, "Just tell me a little bit about him." And she said, "Well, he had rather a loud, deep voice." Well, that's something that I have. And that he was quite a large man. Well, there you go. That's me as well. And his jokes were pretty rubbish. And I have to remind myself occasionally that I'm a lecturer of counselling, not a stand-up comedian. So guilty is charged on that count, perhaps. And then she said, and he told me that I irritated him. And my response to that was, well, there are some things that connect me to your father, but actually I'm not your father, And I explained the phenomena of transference. And after that, all was good. But what happens if that is played out in a therapeutic relationship? How might that look? How might that feel? So consider yourself going to your therapist for the first time. And when you're interacting with your counsellor, you realise or you feel feelings from your past. They remind you of someone from your past. It may be for a time you experience the thoughts and feelings connected with that past relationship with your counsellor. The difficulty arises when those thoughts and feelings go unchecked and you behave towards your counsellor as you did with the person in your past. This could have two effects. The first is that you are not conducting a new relationship based on thoughts and feelings in the present. You're conducting a relationship with thoughts and feelings in the past. And you're effectively discounting the new person because you're going in with a kind of fixed idea of who they are when there may not be that person. The second is that your counsellor is seeing a part of you that is based in the past with all the attending thoughts and feelings. And the added difficulty with transference, it's usually a subconscious process. And as such, we're sometimes not aware it's happening. So how does your therapist know it's going on, and how do they address it? Well, in my experience, there's some signs of possible transference. The first is the client becomes angry at you. It may be for no reason at all. I mean, there are genuine reasons why clients can be angry at you, but it may be that the client just becomes angry at you. And it's worth exploring what's going on in the relationship. What have you done to make them feel angry at you, as I explored with the students? And it might be that actually the anger they have isn't for you, but it is for the person in the past you remind them of. The other phenomenon that sometimes appears is the client can become childlike or coy in your company. There have been times in the past where clients become very childlike, they regress. And when that happens, I am always aware that there's probably some transference going on. At some level, they maybe see me as a parent figure, someone from their past. And I always try and address that. And I may feed back and say to the clients, I've noticed that there's almost a childlike presence with you when you speak to me, and I wonder where that's coming from. Because if someone is really being a child in the therapy room, almost certainly they're in some kind of transferential area. Or the client becomes fearful of you. As a man, I've worked with lots of female clients who've been, abused by men and have not had the best experience of men. And as a consequence of that, they carry that experience through into the therapy room. And sometimes I've seen that appear where clients become fearful. And in those cases, again, I address it. I talk about it and gently try to explore what's going on for them. Sometimes clients can actually be very overt with the transference. I've had people say, you sound just like my dad. In which case, again, that's a way of saying, okay, just tell me a little bit about what I'm doing that's like your dad, and explore it. And also the client becomes fearful that you may judge them. This is something that is maybe very, very subtle, but does come up a lot in therapy. And that is where a client may be frightened of telling you something. And it does link into maybe becoming a little bit more childlike in the therapy room. It's possibly been that they may have had a very critical parent, and as such, they're frightened of speaking to you. Any of these indicates that your client is not seeing you as a new person in the here and now, but as an old investment in a past relationship. If it is the case and the opportunity arises, maybe ask the client, do I remind you of anyone from your past? In cases where the client directly compares you to a past relationship, it's always worth gently reminding them that you are not that person. It may go on to reset the therapeutic relationship to that of equals, not burdened with the baggage of the past.
Thank you as always, Rory. Always something new to learn, although I've looked at transference so many times before. And if you want to get Rory's super duper handout, you can do so by going to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 75, and you can download it from right within the show notes. All of the notes for today's podcast episode, all of the links are there. And of course, you can download the handout on transference in the therapy room. Really, really important stuff there. So moving on, and we are heading into the area of hierarchy of needs, Maslow's pyramid, as it is sometimes referred to, Rory.
Yes, it's one that's taught really level 2 courses, level 3. It's one of the staples of teaching, the humanistic model of counselling, or as it's referred to, the third force in psychology, because Maslow named humanism as the third force in psychology. And the first force would, of course, been psychoanalysis. We've talked about Freud. The second force would have been behaviorism. And the third force was humanism. And it's really interesting. And one of the things that really does come up a lot in assignments is examples give me examples, give examples of the actualizing tendency. So I'm going to share a few of them, and I think one of them is that, the actualizing tendency, for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a triangle. At the bottom of that triangle are physiological needs. So you need things like food, water, sleep, and go to the loo, without being too scatological about this. And then you move up, and then it's security, feeling, having your health, feeling secure. And then you move up again, friendship, love and belonging, intimacy. And then it goes up to esteem, respect, self-esteem, confidence, achievement, and then self-actualization. And that's being what you want to be in the world. And interesting enough, Maslow could only identify, I think, 3 people when he wrote the theory in the 50s who were self-actualized. And one of them was Eisenhower's wife, Eleanor Eisenhower, I think she was called. And he identified her as someone who's self-actualized, mainly because she was very vocal and lived a life on her terms. And I think that is the key thing, is about self-actualized people don't follow the pack. They do as they want. So Richard Branson would be a good example of someone who's self-actualized. He forged his own path. Nelson Mandela would be an example. I'm just trying to think of someone here in the UK. Difficult. Well, you could say the Gallagher brothers, Nolan, Liam Gallagher. They changed the music scene. But I have to mention them. They are from Manchester after all. And they forged your path. I mean, Liam Gallagher, his self-actualization may be interesting, but he definitely is his own person. And he says what he wants and does what he wants. And not maybe the greatest example, but again, that's self-actualization. And we see it all the time in the therapy room, don't we, Ken, where clients come with those conditions of worth and introjected values. They're working off other people's opinions. They're dependent on other people for their self-esteem. And what can happen is that they say, no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this. An example of that might be someone who lives in a big family and they all go down to the pub on a Friday night. And the person says, I don't want to do that. I'd rather sit at home and read a book. That's an example of someone saying, I'm meeting my own needs. So that's self-actualization.
100%. And of course, self-actualization found its way into the person-centered approach when we're looking at Carl Rogers' 7 stages of process, where a client will come in a place of rigidity and move through those 7 stages to a person who is more fluid and more accepting of themselves and that around them. That process Rogers refers to as going through actualization, self-actualizing tendency that brings the person through those 7 stages of process. So there's a nice link in the theory there. And of course, if you go onto Google, if the question is in an assignment, you go onto Google and you put in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're going to be bombarded with a lot of different stuff, because the pyramid is used in so many different sectors, from education, social work, selling. So if you're a salesperson, you're going to look at that hierarchy of needs and it's going to be part of your training. So it's not that easy to find a good resource that is linkable to counseling, linkable to psychotherapy. So I urge you, if you are writing about Maslow, go to counselingtutor.com. Just do a search. We've got a big search bar at the top, and put in Maslow or hierarchy of needs, and you'll get a article returned to you that is written for students of counseling psychotherapy, and it's got the stuff that is important to you in it. But it's a really interesting theory, and I guess we see it around us, and it makes a lot of sense. So it is a little pyramid. Right at the bottom is, as Rory says, it's those physiological needs. You can't live without air. You can't live without water. You can't live without food. So they become the base needs. They form the base of the pyramid. And only when you have those in place, only when you are eating and you have water and air to breathe and you are warm, your body's warm enough, then can you move up to safety. So safety is not a concern if you don't have any food. You'll put yourself at risk to get the food. You'll attack wild animals to get the food. But if you have a steady source of food, you're less likely to put yourself in a risky situation. You have self-actualized, you've moved up one of those levels. And so we move up through love, belonging, being cared for by others. But we only look for that if we feel safe and secure. And we see how quickly one as a human can fall down that pyramid. And we see this when there is a natural disaster. If there is an earthquake, water is cut off, food cannot get through, the shop's shelves are empty, how people go from not really caring about their esteem and their new car or what clothes they wear, which is right up in the pyramid, they're right down to those basic needs. Where is my next meal coming from? Where is my water coming from? So it's interesting how vulnerable, and I guess this is my opinion, we are when we look at that we climb up that pyramid, but very quickly when things are taken away, we're right back at the bottom again.
Absolutely, Ken. It reminds me how lucky we are when you talk about, food, water, shelter, things that, a lot of us, I know that in the UK, it's not always the case, but a lot of us take for granted. But if you just have a look around, certainly in our bigger towns, you realise just where people can be on the pyramid, and very tricky. And if you want a example of the actualising tendency, well, we're heading towards spring here in the UK, and if I look out of my studio window, I can see the trees, and you can see them starting to blossom, the little buds starting to come up, and it is about developing and wanting to be better than you are, but you need certain nutrients. Plants need food, water, sunlight. Human beings need love, opportunities, and security. And Rogers, Maslow, and all the other people in the human potential movement really didn't see any difference in that. We all need to be, we all need nutrients. We all need to be attended to grow.
Love it. And if you look at that is placed in the top of the pyramid by Maslow, you see where he writes self-actualization. It's really interesting that lack of prejudice is right up there, and it's interesting that it's about knowing self. You will be self-actualized by looking at yourself. There's less things that you do in your life and put out. It's more about looking inwardly. And as students of counseling and psychotherapy, we have such an amazing opportunity, and I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity of the training, that I could spend 3.5 years looking at myself and truly saying, are my truths really true? Just linking this into a podcast we did just a few weeks ago, and we'll put the link in the show notes, of concept of self. How do we view others? And right at the top of that pyramid, there it is, lack of prejudice. What a wonderful world it would be if we all sat in that top of that pyramid.
Yeah, and along with that, lack of jealousy. One of the things that is a hallmark really of actualization. And Rogers, as you said, talks about the 7 stages of the process. In the 7th stage, lack of jealousy. So we may want to go away after this podcast and be introspective and just have a bit of a chat with ourselves.
I think that's a perfect place to leave episode 75 of the Counseling Tutor Podcast. We picked up looking at psychodynamic theory. We then moved into practice matters, which it does. And we looked at transference, that transference within the therapy room. And of course, ending off looking at the actualizing tendency, looking at, is it Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, and how that influences the therapies that we might practice.
Yeah, and as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care. If you enjoy the topics and handouts here on the Counseling Tutor Podcast, then you will love the Counseling Study Resource. CSR was built by myself, Ken, and Rory Lees-Oakes to give you the support you need during your counseling studies. So get access to the world's most comprehensive collection of resources aimed at supporting you in your journey to become a counsellor. Take the stress out of your studies by visiting counselingtutor.com/CSR. That's counselingtutor.com/CSR.
Thank you for listening to the Counseling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counselingtutor.com.